Politico reports tonight that U.S. investigators, including the FBI, are looking into a Russian citizen in conjunction with one of the incidents on the Trump campaign last year, which defied explanation at the time. Dramatic news tonight from Politico.com. This incident that happened last summer on the Trump campaign, it was one of the first direct signs that we had that something strange was up in the Trump campaign when it came to the issue of Russia. It's an incident that came to light during the Republican National Convention. Just in the last few days, the explanations around this strange incident that happened during the convention, just in the last few days, the explanations have started to unravel. We're getting some insight into why tonight. The person who is reportedly under FBI scrutiny is a joint Russian-Ukrainian citizen. He apparently worked as a top staffer to Donald Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. He worked with Paul Manafort in Ukraine while Paul Manafort was managing the political fortunes of that country's pro-Vladimir Putin dictator. Now, this guy, again, this is being reported by Politico tonight, this guy who is reportedly being looked into by the FBI, he came to the United States last year to meet with Paul Manafort very shortly after Manafort was given a senior position in the Trump campaign. He came last spring during the height of the Republican presidential primary. Then, this same guy, now apparently being looked into by the FBI, this same guy reportedly came back to the United States again to meet with Paul Manafort in the late summer, right around the time of the Republican National Convention. And at that time, when we were doing our reporting on the convention and what had happened on the sidelines of the convention, at that time, I remember reporting then that something really weird had happened that had to do with Russia, that something weird had happened at the convention. This one strange thing that happened at the RNC that just stood out like a sore thumb. It didn't make any sense given what else we knew about what was going on in Republican politics at the time. It frankly didn't make any sense when it comes to Republican politics of a normal variety at all. I mean, at national conventions, obviously the main job is to nominate the party's candidates for president and vice president. But at the conventions, they also have to formalize the party's platform. And honestly, nobody really cares about what's in a party platform. It's not like a binding document. It's not like you have to, run on those things that are in the party platform or promise to do them once you're elected. The only people who really care about the party platform are real insider party animals. And last summer, it was kind of a relief to those folks, kind of a relief to the lifelong Republican Party activists who live and breathe Republican politics. It was kind of a relief to them when it became clear during their convention that even though Donald Trump was going to be their presidential nominee, he and his campaign really didn't seem to give a fig about what was in the dumb old platform. I mean, in the platform, there was really aggressive anti-abortion stuff that you could imagine maybe Donald Trump himself would be a little wobbly about. This year in the platform, they put in a plank that was anti-porn. Well, okay, when your nominee is Donald Trump, that's nuts. Donald Trump himself appeared in a softcore porn movie. Remember him and the weird Playboy thing, right? So, I mean, there's all this stuff in the Republican Party platform from this past year that doesn't seem very Trumpian. And yeah, it's the social conservative stuff, but a lot of other stuff besides, stuff that doesn't really comport with Trump, the candidate, or with the way he campaigned for the nomination. But party activists were psyched when it came time to work on the platform of the convention, and Trump did not care what was in the platform. Let the Ted Cruz people, let the John Kasich people, whoever else, let them get all excited over that platform. It's not a binding document, who cares? So that itself was kind of an interesting thing to watch at the time. Presidential nominee absents himself from the party platform process. That itself, interesting. But what was way more interesting than that, what was riveting and bizarre to watch at the time, that we couldn't make heads or tails of at the time, was the Trump campaign's one exception on the party platform. Even though they let all this other stuff slide, that was very much not in keeping with Trump and the campaign, they did decide to get up on their hind legs and fight and intercede aggressively for one specific thing in the platform. One specific part of the Republican Party platform, and that was a thing about Russia. There was a proposed plank for the Republican Party platform that said Ukraine should get help from the United States, up to and including lethal weaponry, so Ukraine could fight off Russian incursions. And you know what? The Trump campaign let everything else in the platform slide, even stuff that might theoretically have bothered them. But that Ukraine and Russia thing, they jumped right up on that. And they insisted that that plank only, that one had to be taken out. That language could not stand. And it was weird at the time. And yes, there was a lot else going on in presidential politics. It was the conventions, right? But even then, you know, as the Russia-Trump questions continued to percolate and ultimately got more acute over time, ultimately Trump, the candidate, did have to answer for what his campaign did with the platform at his convention.
Why did you soften the GOP platform on Ukraine?
I wasn't involved in that. Honestly, I was not involved. Yeah, I was not involved in that. I'd like to, I'd have to take a look at it, but I was not involved.
Do you know what they did?
They softened it, I heard, but I was not involved.
I was not involved. In addition to the candidate himself denying having anything to do with it, his campaign manager, Paul Manafort, who had done all that work in Ukraine, he also denied having anything to do with it.
There's been some controversy about something in the Republican Party platform that essentially changed the Republican Party's views when it comes to Ukraine. How much influence did you have on changing that language, sir?
I had none. In fact, I didn't even hear of it until after our convention was over.
Where did it come from then? Because everybody on the platform committee had said it came from the Trump campaign. If not you, who?
No, it absolutely did not come from the Trump campaign. I don't know who everybody is, but I guarantee you,
so nobody from the Trump campaign wanted that change in the platform?
No one. Zero.
So, after the Republican convention, the candidate himself denies having anything to do with it. His campaign manager, Paul Manafort, denies having anything to do with it, denies that neither he nor anyone from the Trump campaign had anything to do with it. How did it happen? Dunno, must have been fairies. Well, now that bizarre non-explanation, those denials have fallen apart because now a former Trump campaign official has fessed up about it. He's a former Trump campaign official named J.D. Gordon, and he says, as a Trump campaign official at the time, taking orders from the Trump campaign at the time, he's the one who did it. He says now that he was the one who interceded in the Republican Party platform to get this language that would keep Russia happy. And he says he did it specifically at Donald Trump's request.
Gordon says that he was a part of the effort that was pushed by the Trump campaign to put some language in the GOP platform that essentially said that the Republican Party did not advocate for arming the Ukrainians in their battle against those pro-Russian separatists. Of course, that was a big issue that was flaring up at the time of the Republican convention. That effort was ultimately successful. They were successful in having that language in the Republican Party platform. And I asked J.D. Gordon, well, why is that? Why did you go ahead and advocate for that language? And he said that this is the language that Donald Trump himself wanted and advocated for.
Okay, so this is just one thing that happened on the Trump campaign. It was really weird at the time. We got all these denials about it that seemed very implausible about it for months. Now it's all falling apart. Why now? Why is this falling apart now? Why are people from the Trump campaign now admitting that, yeah, they did change that plank in the Republican Party platform to make it nicer to Russia? Why are they admitting it now after denying it for months? I don't know. But tonight, as I said, this breaking news, Politico is reporting that the FBI is onto this now, too, because this Russian citizen who worked with Paul Manafort reportedly visited Paul Manafort while he was running the Trump campaign at the time. And he reportedly later told people that what he came to the United States for late last summer, around the time of the Republican convention, was to get that language changed in the Republican Party platform on the issue of Russia. You can feel the pillars sort of start to sway here a little bit, right? Oh, now we've got an explanation for it. Now you're fessing up. Why'd you deny it for so long? And what's the FBI finding? And why is a Russian citizen involved? Every day for the last few days, we've had a new piece of this fall into place, or we've had a previous denial fall apart. As we reported last night, yesterday in London, a man named Christopher Steele resurfaced after having been in hiding for his own safety for weeks. Christopher Steele is a former MI6 officer. He's the author of the unsubstantiated dossier of alleged Russian dirt on Donald Trump that was published by BuzzFeed in January. Last night on this show, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee told us that the House Intelligence Committee will be very interested in obtaining testimony from Christopher Steele for the House Intelligence Committee's inquiry into the Trump campaign and its ties with Russia. Adam Schiff told us last night that his committee, quote, certainly will want to get to the bottom of the details of that dossier and report what has been substantiated, what hasn't, and find out just how Mr. Steele based those conclusions. He told us, quote, if it's an issue of him not wanting to appear, him not wanting to come here and face questions from the whole committee, we more than welcome his cooperation in any manner that he is comfortable. Quote, if it's an issue about whether he is willing to come before the committee, I can say I am more than willing to go to him. I know there are other members of the committee who would join me in that. Right, that's an unusual offer from a top member of a Congressional Intelligence Committee. I will come to you, sir. I will go to a foreign country to get your testimony. Stay where you are. We can come to you. Right? But this is a guy who clearly thinks that he has safety issues. This is a guy who has been in hiding for weeks, reportedly in fear for his own safety, ever since he was revealed as the author of this dossier of alleged Russian dirt. The reason I raised the issue of that dossier in conjunction with this new information about the Trump campaign, now admitting that, yeah, they did change the Republican Party platform to make it more pro-Russian. The reason I raised these two things together, that dossier and finally us getting an explanation on what happened with that Ukraine and Russia plank in the Republican convention, the reason I raised these together is because one of the baseline allegations of that dossier is actually, it appears to be about that platform change. One of the things that the dossier alleges is essentially a quid pro quo between Russia and the Donald Trump campaign. This is a quote from the dossier. The Russian regime has been behind the recent leak of embarrassing email messages emanating from the Democratic National Committee to the WikiLeaks platform. The reason for using WikiLeaks was plausible deniability. The operation has been conducted with the full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. In return, the Trump team has agreed to sideline Russian intervention in Ukraine as a campaign issue. And again, I have to stress that we need to describe this dossier as an unverified dossier of Russian allegations against Donald Trump. But every day I lead my show, and I think I'm going to be talking about something else. But every day, over the course of the news cycle, a new piece of it falls in place. And this is just the latest one. I mean, in the last couple of weeks and days, even into tonight, more pieces of it are falling into place. I mean, the Trump campaign used to deny that any of its staffers, anyone related to the Trump campaign, had any contact with any Russians during the campaign. Well, no. In fact, meetings between Trump campaign people and Russians have now led to the resignation of the National Security Advisor. It's led to the recusal of the Attorney General of the United States. The Trump campaign, as of last night, is not only admitting a trip to Russia by one of its official foreign policy advisors during the campaign, but as of last night, they're now admitting that this trip was authorized by the Trump campaign at the time he went to Moscow. Now, Politico.com is reporting what is basically a direct Russian tie to that change in the Republican Party platform to benefit Russia last year. If Politico's reporting is accurate, then the FBI is looking into a Russian national who was previously suspected of ties to the Russian security services. And they are reportedly looking into his role in what the Trump campaign now admits were its efforts to, what is it? Quote, sideline Russian intervention in Ukraine as a campaign issue. To take Russian intervention in Ukraine basically out of the Republican Party platform as an issue. It's every day another piece of it gets corroborated. So we will all continue to describe this dossier from Christopher Steele as unfounded and unsupported. And that is certainly true when it comes to the dossier's baseline allegation that the Trump campaign not only knew about, but they actively supported the Russian government's attacks on Hillary Clinton and the Russian government's hacking and intervention into our presidential election to benefit Trump. But even if that is, as yet, in itself uncorroborated and undocumented, all the supporting details are checking out. Even the really outrageous ones, a lot of them are starting to bear out under scrutiny. It seems like a new one each passing day. And now that the author of this dossier, this increasingly corroborated dossier, has been found, has surfaced in Britain, and he's okay, it's now starting to feel like an incredibly important question about any U.S. investigation of this matter.